They didn't even let her pack a second blanket. One man carried her trunk to the edge of the ranch, dropped it in the dust, and walked away without a word. The others stood in a line, like spectators to something they'd rehearsed. Cold, tight-lipped, ashamed not of what they were doing, but of how loud her baby cried as she was pushed through the wooden gate. Miriam didn't beg. Not once. She held her daughter tighter, whispered soft nonsense into the child's ear, and turned her back on the only place she had left. Her husband had died 6 days earlier, trampled in a freak accident while driving cattle through flooded ground. He had no will, no claim. His brothers had taken everything: livestock, tools, even the horse she had nursed back to health. "You were his wife," one said, "not ours." And that was it. No room, no rights, no shelter. The town wasn't far, but her boots were cracked, and the baby was hot with fever. She walked anyway, one hand clutching the worn handle of her trunk, the other cradling her only child, Anna, just 6 months old, all blue eyes and broken breathing. Dust rose with every step. No one offered a ride. The saloon doors stayed closed. The general store shuttered as she passed. It was as if grief itself were contagious. Finally, just outside the edge of town, she found a hollow patch of land. Half cleared, a few stumps, the rotted frame of what had once been a shed. She collapsed there at dusk, baby curled against her chest, and stared at the wide sky until the stars blinked down like judgment. That night, she didn't cry. She built a fire with her hands trembling from exhaustion and held her baby through every cough, every shiver, every breathless gasp. In the silence between wind gusts, Miriam whispered, "I don't care if they took everything. They didn't take you." The next morning she found a broken axe buried in weeds and a pile of rotted boards half covered by vines. She wiped her daughter's face clean with the corner of her dress, then stood, picked up the axe, and began swinging. No tools, no help, no roof. But Miriam had something else, something no one had seen in her since the day they called her just a wife. She had resolve. The kind of resolve you build when the world tries to erase you, and you decide to write your name back in with your own 2 hands. By the 4th day, her hands were blistered raw, the nails chipped to split ends, and her arms ached with a pain so deep it made breathing feel like breaking. But Miriam didn't stop. She found rusted nails in the dirt, leftover fence wire in a collapsed trough, and a hammerhead wedged in a pile of stone. No handle, just metal. She wrapped it in cloth and struck anyway. With every beat into splintered wood, she told herself, "This isn't for them. This is for her." Anna's fever had broken, but the cough lingered, and every time the baby whimpered, Miriam worked faster. There were no walls yet, just a leaning structure of upright beams lashed together with rope from the trunk. The roof was patched with old canvas she found buried under the shed remains, weighed down with rocks and her own stubbornness. On the 6th morning, she carried Anna in a sling on her chest while lifting a beam onto her shoulder. Her knees nearly buckled, but a bird landed nearby and began singing, and something inside her cracked, not from pain, but from remembering that the world was still going, still moving, even as hers had been torn down. That afternoon, a rider passed. He slowed but didn't stop, just looked long and hard, then tipped his hat and rode on. Miriam didn't flinch. She was used to being seen and not helped. She kept working. That night, she built a tiny fire in a ring of stone and mashed beans from her stores into paste, feeding Anna by fingertip. "I know it ain't much," she whispered, "but it's ours." The baby smiled, just once, and that was enough. At dawn, she planted nails in a straight line, paced out the floor with her bare feet, and carved a line in the dirt where the door would stand. A door to what? No one else would ask. But to her, it was the line between loss and choosing to live. On the 8th day, rain came, a hard, punishing wall of it. Miriam wrapped Anna in every dry scrap she had, stood over her with arms out, and took the storm like it was personal. And maybe it was. Maybe the sky had to see if she'd break. But she didn't. Because widows don't just mourn. They remember. They rebuild. They rage without shouting. And when the rain stopped and the sun broke through, Miriam stepped out from beneath her tarp shelter, soaked, shivering, and smiling through her teeth. She whispered to the wind, "I'm still here." And for the first time since burying her husband, she believed it. She didn't see who left the first bundle, just woke one morning to find it tied in a ragged cloth at the base of her fence post, a bar of soap, 2 potatoes, and a wooden spoon. Miriam stared at it for a long time, half expecting a trick, a note, or some condition scratched in charcoal. There was none. Just quiet offerings, left without expectation. She said nothing. Took them inside, gave thanks beneath her breath, and kept building. But after that, it happened again. A scrap of oilcloth one morning, a tin of dried beans the next. Once, a pair of baby shoes that fit Anna almost perfectly. Someone was watching. Not out of pity, but maybe out of shame. Maybe the same townsfolk who'd closed their shutters now saw the smoke from her fire each night and couldn't look away. Still, no one knocked. No one dared speak to her. She was the woman who'd been cast out and didn't die. That made her dangerous to the story they told themselves. Miriam added a second beam to the front of the cabin and propped it up with a fence post. It leaned slightly, but it stood. She carved notches into the wood, 14 total, 1 for each day since she'd been pushed from her home. Anna's cough had eased. Her cheeks flushed pink now. She had begun to laugh again, clutching Miriam's thumb while lying on a blanket woven from torn shirt sleeves. Miriam didn't laugh back yet, but she smiled. And when the wind picked up, she didn't brace herself like before. She stood in it. That week, a group of children wandered near. Miriam saw them from the corner of her eye while mending a split plank. They didn't speak, didn't cross the tree line, just watched her hammer with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "Mama says she's not right in the head." Another replied, "Mama don't know nothing. Look what she built." The next morning, a basket appeared, this one filled with eggs and a folded note. 4 words, written in a child's hand. For the baby, too. Miriam sat with the note in her lap long after Anna had gone to sleep. Her fingers traced the crooked letters like scripture. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. She had not vanished. She had not been erased. Every board she nailed, every gift she received without asking, was proof. Not that she was surviving, but that her existence now demanded to be seen, not as a widow, not as a beggar, but as a woman who made a home out of nothing but grief, love, and wood. It was the sound of hooves that broke the stillness, not the usual distant kind, but steady and close. Intentional. Miriam stood beside her nearly finished wall, hammer in hand, her dress dusted in saw shavings and sweat. Anna lay wrapped on a feed sack nearby, cooing to the sky. The rider was Sheriff Harlan Griggs, and unlike the others, he didn't pass with just a glance. He stopped. He didn't dismount, just watched her in silence as if unsure whether he was meant to speak or just witness. Miriam didn't flinch, didn't ask if he'd come to chase her off, claim she was squatting, or ask questions she refused to answer. She lifted her hammer and drove a nail deep into the beam, the thunk echoing louder than it should have. "Didn't think you'd last out here," he finally said. She didn't answer. They said you'd be gone in a week, he added. That you'd come crawling back. Still, she stayed quiet. Her hands worked the next plank. Guess they don't know what a woman does when her child's all she's got, he murmured. A long silence fell between them, interrupted only by Anna's soft babble. The sheriff shifted in the saddle. Some folks say you're a danger. Miriam raised her eyes at that. Not angry, just sharp. To who? She asked. Her voice didn't tremble. To the way things are, he replied. You prove too much. He didn't smile, but something softened in his weathered face. You didn't steal, didn't beg, just built. He looked at the structure. Not bad work. It's not finished, she said, wiping her brow. Good, he replied, turning his horse. Keep finishing it. And he rode off. No threats, no citations, just a warning disguised as respect. That night Miriam lay beside Anna on the cabin floor, still without a door or chimney, but warm enough. She stared at the beams above her, counting each one like a prayer bead. The sheriff's words circled her mind. Not as fear, but as fuel. You prove too much. Maybe she did. Maybe that's why people left gifts at her fence. Why children whispered. Why the town couldn't decide whether to admire her or erase her. She had refused to vanish, and for that she'd become inconvenient. But there was power in being seen. Not pitied. Seen. And tomorrow she would raise the final wall, not to shelter, to claim. Because a woman with nothing, building something that couldn't be taken, was the loudest kind of rebellion. The knock wasn't loud, but it was the first. Miriam had nearly dropped the tin bowl she was scrubbing in the dirt when she heard it. Not a child's whisper at the fence. Not a dropped basket in the dark. A real knock on her unfinished doorway, right where a proper door would someday hang. She stood slowly, heart beating harder than it should, and walked over, pressing her palm to the frame before pulling back the makeshift curtain. A woman stood there, about her age, dressed in worn but clean clothes, a satchel over one shoulder, and books clutched to her chest. Her hair was pinned tight. Her eyes were not. I'm Miss Cartwright, she said gently, as if speaking to a skittish colt. I teach the school in town, or I did. Not many come anymore. Miriam didn't answer, just waited. I heard you have a little one, she continued, glancing past Miriam's shoulder at Anna lying wrapped in her patched blanket near the hearth. Thought she might need stories, words, someday lessons? Miriam crossed her arms. You here to teach her or judge me? The woman didn't flinch. Maybe both. Teaching's like that, but mostly I came because you're doing something right, and folks in town are starting to wonder what they missed. That startled Miriam more than the knock. The woman reached into her satchel and pulled out a small cloth book, hand-stitched, faded ink, with pictures drawn by hand. You don't owe me anything, she said. I just figured the world should meet your daughter with more than silence. She set the book on the stump near the doorway and turned to go. You're welcome to visit the schoolhouse, too. We still have one. For now. Miriam watched her walk back down the trail, disappearing into trees that now bowed beneath their own quiet. That night, she opened the book by firelight, holding Anna close. The drawings were simple. Animals, letters, little stories. Anna pointed with her tiny fingers, smiling, her eyes wide with a wonder Miriam hadn't known could still be born in dirt floor cabins. And Miriam read. Slowly. Careful with each word, like it was a fragile thing she hadn't touched in years. Her voice cracked more than once, but Anna didn't mind. She gurgled. She listened. And for the first time, Miriam felt like she wasn't just building a shelter. She was building a life with room for light, for language, and for the future. And maybe, Just maybe, that was the most radical thing a widow with nothing could ever do. The fever came in the night like a thief. One moment, Anna was giggling at shadows on the ceiling, and the next, her small body was burning beneath the quilt, her breath ragged, her cries weak and slow. Miriam didn't panic. She couldn't afford to. Instead, she moved like a storm had rolled through her, fast and merciless, fetching herbs, boiling water, grinding willow bark with shaking hands. But nothing brought the heat down. The wet cloths turned warm in seconds. The air inside the cabin seemed to choke. She held her child and whispered stories that didn't exist just to keep herself from shattering. "You're stronger than them all, little one," she whispered. "Stronger than the ones who left us. Stronger than the dirt, the silence, the fire." But Anna's eyes fluttered without focus, and Miriam felt a scream rise in her throat, one she buried in Anna's hair as she rocked her, back and forth, harder, faster, begging the earth not to take her only light. Morning brought no mercy, only stillness. Miriam's legs gave way on the cabin floor. She stayed there, cradling her daughter, mouth dry, soul clawing at the silence. Then footsteps. She looked up, startled, not daring to believe she'd heard right. The door curtain moved, and Miss Cartwright pushed through with a basket, breathless. "I heard," she said simply. "They talk." She knelt without asking and touched Anna's forehead, then looked into Miriam's tear-ravaged eyes. "She needs more than bark and prayers. Come." Miriam didn't ask where. She didn't argue. She wrapped Anna and followed barefoot through frost-bitten grass and frozen creek stones, past judgmental porches and narrow-eyed glances, straight into town where Miss Cartwright opened her home. Not a schoolhouse, but her own, warm and plain. Inside waited tea, blankets, and a man with gray hair and soft hands. "He's my brother," she said. "A doctor, trained in places this town pretends don't exist." He worked in silence, unrolling cloth, preparing tinctures Miriam didn't recognize. Hours passed like lifetimes. Then Anna coughed, wet, deep, painful, but alive. By evening, her fever broke. Miriam didn't cry until she felt her daughter's tiny fingers grip hers again. The doctor smiled, nodded once, and left. Miss Cartwright handed Miriam bread and whispered, "You built something too strong to lose now." Miriam nodded, holding Anna close. That night she sat by the hearth of another woman's home and realized people didn't just fear what she was building. Some were praying it would last. And now, so was she. The day after Anna's fever broke, the knocks didn't stop. First came the woman with a limp who left a small sack of flour on the fence post and walked off without a word. Then 2 boys, barely older than 12, asking if they could help mend the broken step. Then Miss Cartwright again, this time not with books or bread, but with a hammer in her hand. "Some people want to see you fail," she said plainly. "Others just need to see what it looks like when someone doesn't." Miriam didn't understand it at first. She wasn't used to kindness without cost. But as the knocks continued, she began to see them not as charity, but as challenge, as something greater than pity, as recognition. On the 5th day, a man knocked. He was tall, rough around the edges, and looked like someone who hadn't smiled in a year. "Name's Harland," he said. "Got a sawmill up near Bitter Ridge. Heard you need help framing that roof proper. I don't talk much, but I can build." Miriam stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Why?" she asked. He looked down, scuffed his boot against the dirt. "Because someone once helped me, and I didn't let that go to waste. Don't reckon you will either." That afternoon, he started work. By evening, others had joined. Not all stayed, not all spoke, but they came. quiet hands and tired hearts drawn to something they didn't fully understand. It wasn't about the cabin. It was about the woman inside it who'd stood when she was supposed to fold. The one who hadn't begged, hadn't cursed, just kept going. As the walls went up and beams took shape, so did something else. Respect. Not the kind earned by name or marriage or title, but the kind born of sweat and survival. Miriam didn't cry when the frame of the new room rose. She didn't speak when a proper door was hung. But she ran her fingers over the fresh wood, as if touching proof that the world could change its mind, that she wasn't just a widow with a baby anymore. She was a builder of something new. That night, Anna slept deeper than she had in weeks, and Miriam sat by the fire holding a mug of warm tea she hadn't brewed herself. She looked out at the quiet forest beyond the finished walls, and thought, not of the pain that brought her here, but of the hands that had helped her stay. It began with a shadow near the fence. Miriam saw it from the window as she washed Anna's tiny dress in a basin, the shape too stiff to be dear and too silent to be neighbor. By the time she stepped outside, it was gone. But that night, the chickens scattered. The next, her firewood stack had been kicked down. On the third, she found the baby's blanket draped across the fence, though she hadn't left it there. Fear didn't paralyze her. It sharpened her, made her test the lock she'd crafted from scrap iron, made her sleep with a carving knife within reach. She didn't say anything to Miss Cartwright or Harland. Some ghosts had to be faced without borrowed hands. It was on the fifth night that the knock came. Soft, measured, almost polite. She didn't open it. "Miriam," the voice said through the wood. "It's Jonas. You remember me?" Her stomach turned. Jonas Gray, the man her husband had once trusted with business, and the same one who showed up 2 days after the funeral to take the last of the tools and the deed. "You were supposed to be gone by winter," he called again, his voice laced with mock concern. "Folks said you're still here, said you built something." She didn't answer. "Well, I come to remind you. That land, your husband owed it, and I bought the debt. You got no claim." Miriam's fingers tightened around the latch, but she didn't move. Not yet. "I'll be back with paper," he said, "and with the sheriff if need be." His footsteps crunched away, deliberate. When she opened the door, the night was still. The fear lingered, but so did something else. Resolve. The next morning, she hitched the mule cart and rode into town, Anna bundled beside her. She went straight to the church, then to the postmaster, and finally to the town ledger office, where Miss Cartwright was already waiting with 3 old books and a quiet nod. "I thought he might show," she said. "Your husband had something Jonas never did. A conscience. And he signed this." She held out a folded paper. "Before the fire. Before he passed." It was a receipt, a paid in full, witnessed and sealed. "He gave it to me to hold in case anything ever went wrong." Miriam blinked, speechless. "You still own the land," Miss Cartwright said softly. "And now they know it too." Miriam exhaled, slow and heavy. Jonas had come to scare her off. But he'd forgotten something critical. She was no longer a woman waiting to be left behind. She was the storm that stayed. Jonas never returned. Not with papers, not with the sheriff, not even with threats. Word had spread faster than his schemes could travel, and this time, the town didn't turn its head. Harland came by 2 days later with a wooden sign he'd carved himself. The Ward place. Miriam stared at it, the name heavy with everything she'd earned, everything she'd endured. "It's yours," he said, "if you want it seen." She did. They hung it above the gate together, and that night, with Anna asleep by the fire, and the house finally sealed against the cold, Miriam let herself breathe like someone who'd made it. But survival wasn't the end. It was the start. With the land now secured and the cabin standing firm, she turned to something more delicate: belonging. She invited the older girl who'd been watching her goats to stay a while. Then the widow with twins, who hadn't smiled in months. Soon, her home became a place where the lost drifted in without knocking. Quiet girls with dirt on their cheeks, mothers with bruised eyes, men too tired to explain why they had nothing but a name. Miriam didn't ask questions. She handed them a task, a place to sit, and bread if she had it. What they gave back was something no coin could buy: trust, community. The kind built not with sermons or laws, but with hands and silence and space. The kind her husband never knew he was leaving her for. One evening, Harland lingered as the sky pinked and fireflies began to stir. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked, not accusing, just curious. Miriam looked out over the land, the fence she had rebuilt, the rows she had sown, the people who'd begun calling her name not as gossip, but as help. "I think," she said, "that for the first time I have something no one can auction off, burn down, or carry away." He smiled faintly. "And that?" "Is mine," she said simply. "Every inch of it." Harlan tipped his hat and turned toward the road, and for a moment the world felt still, not quiet like grief, but quiet like peace. That night, as she tucked Anna beneath the quilt sewn from old flour sacks, Miriam whispered a truth only the firelight could hear. "You weren't born into safety. But I'll make sure you grow up in it." No man had handed her this life. No mercy had delivered it. She had carved it out of pain, stitched it from ruin, and named it her own. By the first spring thaw, the Ward place had become more than just a home. It was a circle of second chances wrapped in fence posts, laughter, and honest work. Anna toddled now, bare feet padding along the porch boards as chickens flapped, and neighbors came and went with borrowed tools and fresh bread. Miriam kept the stove warm and her heart open, but never naive. She knew how quickly peace could vanish, how fast the world could burn again. But she also knew the strength of what she'd planted. One morning, as the snow finally melted into mud and green shoots pushed through tired ground, Miriam found a letter on her doorstep. No name, no return address, just her own name scrawled in unfamiliar ink. Inside was a single folded sheet. It read, "I saw what you did. I was wrong about you. You didn't need saving. You needed space to rise, and you did." There was no signature, but she knew. Maybe Jonas, maybe someone else. It didn't matter. She burned the letter in the stove, watching the paper curl and vanish into smoke. Let them watch. Let them know. She owed no one her story. That afternoon, Miss Cartwright visited with 3 young girls trailing behind her, new arrivals. Quiet, sunburned, eyes too wide for their age. Miriam didn't hesitate. She knelt, met each gaze, and offered her hand. "This is a home," she said. "That's all that matters now." And when one of them whispered, "Are you the lady they talk about? The one with the baby and the farm?" Miriam smiled and pulled Anna close. "I'm a woman who was left with nothing. And now, I have everything that counts." That night, the cabin flickered with light and stories, quilts laid out like rivers across the floor. Miriam watched from the corner, holding Anna tight, her fingers brushing the girl's curls. Outside, the wind moved soft through the trees. No ghosts left, no shadows waiting, only the rhythm of a life earned, not given. The town never built a statue for her. They never carved her name into the church wall. But they remembered her all the same. Years later, when strangers asked who first gave this place its backbone, they spoke of the widow who showed up with nothing but a baby and a spine forged from fire. And how, With no man behind her and no promise ahead, she built a life no one could take away. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more stories like this on Stories Left Behind. If you'd seen her walking into town that first day with just a baby in her arms, would you have believed what she'd become? Tell us in the comments.